History of my oldest ancestors of whom I am very proud descend. May 14, 1097, beginning of the siege of Nicaea, in the First Crusade, Nobles' Crusade, led by Bohemund of Hauteville, my 31st grandfather, for times my grandfather, first Prince of Antioch, Prince of Taranto, by Geoffrey of Bouillon, great-great-grandfather of Saint Anthony of Lisbon, Raymond IV of Toulouse, Robert II of Normandy and Stephen of Blois, Hugo Magnum, Count of Vermandois and Valois, my 32nd and 34th grandfather, and his brother Philip I of France, my 31st grandfather, 5 times my grandfather, bearer of the papal standard, father-in-law of Bohemund of Hauteville, Prince of Antioch and Prince of Taranto. Bohemundo de Hauteville, first Prince of Antioch, Prince of Taranto, was the son of Roberto Guiscardo de Hauteville, Duke of Apulia, Calabria and Sicily, and Alvarada de Buonalbergo, paternal grandson of Tancredo de Hauteville and Fredisenda of Normandy, daughter of Richard I, Duke of Normandy and Gunora de Crepon, Princess of Denmark. Bohemund of Hauteville, Prince of Taranto, was the first Prince of Antioch and one of the leaders of the First Crusade. He was the firstborn of Roberto Guiscardo de Hauteville, Duke of Apulia, Calabria and Sicily, by his first wife Alvarada de Buonalbergo. He was baptized with the first name Marco, but would be called Bohemundo by his father. Noble titles. The title of Prince of Taranto was not used by Bohemund during his lifetime, but was created by Roger II of Sicily in 1132. It was retroactively granted to Bohemund in 1153, as Antiochus et Tarantinus Princeps, Prince of Antioch and Taranto, in the Barese diplomatic codex, and later commonly called Princeps Tarantinus, Prince of Taranto. During his lifetime, Bohemund signed documents simply as Roberti Ducis Filius, son of Duke Robert, until the capture of Antioch. His son and successor Bohemund II, Prince of Antioch, referred to his father as Magnus Bohemundus, which can be read as Bohemund the Great, due to his enormous physical stature or his warrior feats, or as Bohemund the Old, perhaps to differentiate himself from his son, supposedly the New. Finally, due to the dispute that Bohemund of Hauteville had with his brother, and with the subsequent diminution of the Duchy of Apulia, he was called the Duke of Apulia Dux Apulii by some chroniclers. But the title most frequently used during his lifetime would have been Prince of Antioch Antiochus Princeps. The First Crusade. In 1096, Bohemundo accompanied his uncle Rogerio I of Sicily in the attack on the city of Amalfi, which had revolted against Rogerio Borsa. Groups of crusaders began to pass through, crossing the Italian peninsula on their way to Constantinople. Motivated, Bohemundo saw an opportunity to create his own principality in the east. The 11th century chronicler Geoffrey Malaterra clearly states that Bohemund took the cross only with the intention of conquering Greek lands. The Prince of Taranto organized a Norman army, perhaps one of the best of the crusading host. He crossed the Adriatic Sea and entered Constantinople by the route he had previously attempted to follow in 1082 to 1084. He was careful to observe the political strategy of Alexios I Komnenos, Emperor of Constantinople, my 30th grandfather, for times my grandfather, and, when he arrived in Constantinople in April 1097, he paid homage to the emperor. He had demanded an oath from the leaders of the crusade to hand over the lands reconquered to the Muslims. It is possible that Bohemund negotiated with Alexios about a principality in Antioch. If he did, he will not have been encouraged by the Byzantine. From Constantinople to Antioch, Bohemund of Hauteville was probably the main leader of the First Crusade. It is noteworthy that, under his leadership, the First Crusade managed to cross Asia Minor, unlike the subsequent crusades of 1101, 1147, and 1189, which would fail. A political man, Bohemundo de Hauteville used the enthusiasm of the Crusaders for his own ends. When his nephew Tancred separated from the main army in Heraclea Sibistra, current city of Ireli, Turkey, to try to establish a crusader post in Cilicia, which would help Baldwin of Bologna to found the county of Edessa, his maneuver may have had already an intention to prepare for the creation of his uncle's principality. Bohemundo de Hauteville became one of the most important crusader leaders. At the siege of Antioch he played his cards very well and finally took exclusive control of the city, which he did not hand over to Byzantium as he had promised, but kept it for himself. Prince of Antioch. While Jerusalem was taken by the rest of the Crusader army, Bohemund of Hauteville consolidated his power. An unfortunate incident that happened to him, being held captive for 3 years by the Sultan of Mosul, almost ruined his ambitions. However, he took revenge when, in 1105, after destroying the Sultan's army at Harran, he negotiated the surrender of Aleppo, becoming after the annexation the most powerful Christian prince of the Levant. This made his relations with Baldwin II of Edessa, his ally in Harran, difficult, who found that Bohemund of Hauteville had conquered a large city for himself. The leaders of the First Crusade. Bohemund of Hauteville, first Prince of Antioch and Prince of Taranto, my 31st grandfather, 4 times my grandfather. Godofredo de Bulao, great-great-grandfather of Santo Antonio de Lisboa. Raimundo IV of Toulouse. Hugo Magnum, Count of Vermandois and of Valois, my 32nd and 34th grandfather, and his brother Philip I of France, my 31st grandfather, 5 times my grandfather, bearer of the papal standard, father-in-law of Bohemund of Hauteville, Prince of Antioch and Prince of Taranto. Robert II of Normandy and Stephen of Blois, who brought the contingent from northern France. The Siege of Nicaea. The Siege of Nicaea was the first battle of the First Crusade or Nobles' Crusade. From May 14, 1097 to June 19, 1097, Crusader forces and a Byzantine contingent surrounded and conquered the city of Nicaea, present-day Iznik, from the Sultanate of Rum. Background. Nicaea, present-day Iznik, had been conquered by the Seljuk Turks from the Byzantine Empire in 1077, becoming the capital of the Sultanate of Rum. In 1096, the Popular Crusade, first stage of the First Crusade, pillaged the lands around this city before being annihilated by the Turks. Consequently, Sultan Quilihe Arslan first underestimated the military power of the approaching second wave of Crusaders, leaving his family and treasury in Nicaea to go and fight the Danismendids to the east for possession of Melitene. With the arrival of the Nobles' Crusade at the end of the year, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, my 30th grandfather, 4 times my grandfather, managed to negotiate a joint attack on Nicaea with them. The city enjoyed solid defenses, which included 6 kilometers of walls with 240 towers and Lake Ascanio to the southwest, which blocked enemy access from that flank and guaranteed the reception of communications, provisions, and possibly reinforcements through its waters. The siege. The Crusaders began to leave Constantinople at the end of April 1097. Godofredo de Bulao was the first leader to arrive in Nicaea. On May 6, Bohemund of Hauteville, Prince of Taranto, and his nephew Tancred of Hauteville, Raymond IV of Toulouse and Robert II of Flanders had already arrived, together with Peter the Hermit and some survivors of the Popular Crusade, and a small Byzantine contingent under the command of Manuel Butumita. With a serious shortage of provisions, Bohemund organized food supplies by land and sea and began the siege on May 14, 1097. The Crusaders distributed their contingents across different sections of the walls. The Prince of Taranto camped north of the city, Godofredo to the east and Raimundo with Aidemar de Monteiro to the south. On May 16, a force of besieged Turks went out to attack the Christians and were defeated in the skirmish, losing 200 soldiers. Upon receiving a request for assistance from his garrison in Nicaea, Quilihe Arslan realized the military power of these Crusaders and tried to return. His vanguard was defeated by Raymond of Toulouse and Robert of Flanders on May 20, and the following day the Seljuk army of around 10,000 men lost a battle that dragged on until after nightfall. The losses were serious on both sides, but it was the Sultan who ended up withdrawing, despite Nicaea's pleas. In Iconium, present-day Konya, which would become the new capital of the Sultanate, Quilihe Arslan sent a message to his garrison of Nicaea. In view of the attacks by the previous wave of Crusaders, he suggested the city surrender to the Byzantines if its situation improved. Become unsustainable. As if proving that the fear of the Latins was justified, during the siege they catapulted the heads of Turkish soldiers killed in previous battles inside the walls. The remaining Crusader army arrived during the month of May, and Roberto II and Estevio II at the beginning of June, forming a total of around 30,000 infantry soldiers and 4,200 to 4,500 knights. Meanwhile, Raimundo and Aidemar built a large siege engine, which was transported, on wheels, to a tower in the city, called Torre de Ganatas. They intended to harass the defenders of the walls while the sappers dug a tunnel to undermine the tower that was damaged, but the action was not decisive. Arrival of the Byzantines. the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos had decided not to accompany the Crusaders, but had left with a contingent that had stayed away, camping in Peleikono, also next to Lake Ascanio. On June 17, Byzantine boats arrived under the command of Manuel Butumaita, preventing the city from receiving provisions and communications across the lake, as had been done until now. General Tatisio, at the head of 2,000 peltastes, also joined the siege. Fearing that the Crusaders would renege on their oath in Constantinople and not return Nicaea to him after it was conquered, Alexo instructed Butumaita to secretly negotiate the city's surrender to the Byzantines. Tatisio should join the Latins in a direct attack on the walls, while Manuel Butumaita would pretend to do the same to make it believe that the Byzantines had taken the city in battle. After witnessing the actions of the popular crusade in their lands, and fearing the barbarity of these crusaders, the Turks surrendered to Butumaita. On the morning of June 19, 1097, the Latins were surprised to see the Byzantine standard already on the city walls. The end of Bohemund of Hauteville. Bohemund of Hauteville, Prince of Antioch, Prince of Taranto, would die on March 3, 1111, having been buried in Canosa di Apulia, on March 6, 1111, leaving a son who would inherit his domains, Bohemund II of Antioch, my 30th grandfather, for times my grandfather. Family and descent. From the marriage between Bohemund of Hauteville, first Prince of Antioch and Prince of Taranto, with Constance, Princess of France, my 31st grandmother, for times my grandmother, *1078, 1108, daughter of Philip I, King of France, and Bertha of Holland, born. Bohemund II of Hauteville, Prince of Antioch, Alice of Rethel, my 30th grandparents, for times my grandparents.